Welcome back to this third session. I hope you enjoyed the lunch and maybe even you had time to make a little short walk outside. Here at the third session about national standards, we will get a better understanding about the efforts to achieve person-centered care and integrated care from a national perspective. We will have two speakers and two discussants as in the previous sessions. And my name is Ann-Marie Boström, and I will chair this session. Our first speaker will present a European standard for person-centered care, and it's Carl Svedberg. And I want to welcome Carl Svedberg to you. Carl Svedberg is a senior professor of cardiology at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, and he has been a scientific advisor to Gothenburg University Center for Person-Centered Care since it was initiated 2010. So please welcome.
Why do we need a standard? I think the discussion this morning revealed the importance of having a standard that is a definition of what we are talking about, and we heard several types of definition of both person-centered and integrated care. And so obviously a standard is a valuable component, in particular when you're doing research, and also to standardize care within and between hospitals and between countries as well. But most of all, what we felt was a necessity during our work with the various intervention trials was the need to have some kind of common standard, because usually in the early phases of our work at GPCC, we realized that the methodology description of what we were doing took a lot of space. But if we could use a type of standard that would simplify this part. So GPCC took an initiative to move to a standard, and we contacted the Swedish Institute for Standards, SIS, and a technical committee was created, which I chaired. I must say, before that, I had no idea how standards were developed. And it's a very type of routine format that SIS is using. And it was a very interesting experience, of course, when you're learning something new. And one crucial part about the discussion around person-centered care was the way of patient involvement. And if we talk about what's often used is patient-centered, and that's when the care is organized around the patient and in some kind of kindness, because one thinks that makes it easier to provide care. But in person-centered care, it's the difference is that the patient becomes involved in the care as a partner, and which the ethics of this approach compared to patient-centered is very important and not often realized by the health professionals, and I would say in particular among physicians. So that's one fundamental part. Now, when we started to meet in a Swedish technical committee, as I alluded to, and there were, and I'll come back to that, several organizations invited, and some of the people here, Helle, for example, was involved, but and it was an open invitation to unions and organizations to participate, and we were about 17 people in the Swedish Technical Committee, and developed the draft that we then moved forward to a European approach. And the European standardization is organized by CEN, and that involves the European countries and actually some countries also outside Europe. And on top of that, there are partners invited, organizations like ANAC, and there is not a voting system based on the number of participants, but in particular for the countries involved, the voting is weighted based on the size of the country. So, for example, Germany has many more votes than Sweden, which is important to realize. It's organized in a very standard format. The concept is developed. There is a discussion a number of times around a text, and then the committee meets and discuss further, and it was very stimulating meetings, and there were also interesting to see how the acceptance of person-centered care varied among countries. One of the, I must say, problems with developing a standard in this way, involving patients the way, is that some attitudes against losing power, and that is obviously a problem for some physicians. And some countries with very strong unions for physicians were actually against this type of development, because why, as we as physicians know best, why involve patients? We can tell what to do, and that was an attitude actually that was reflected in the discussions. Very surprising and very interesting to follow. So CN organized this meeting among the 34 members. All those were invited, not those who actively participated was Austria, Belgium, Czech Republic, Finland, Ireland, Norway, Sweden, and Portugal. And that group was chaired by Axel Wolf from GPCC, and where I obviously represented Sweden. And then there were some organizations that were invited as non-voting members, and that was the European Trade Union Confederation, and ANAC, the consumer voice in standardizations. So a very mixed group of participants with also, once again, mostly very interesting discussions, in particular among those actively involved. And while the resistance, they really didn't participate more than they expressed some doubts about using this type of development. Now, in the background for the standard, there was which is done when standards are developed, there is a scope. What is the intention with the standard? And that was clearly defined. We had already developed it in the Swedish Technical Committee, and that was to define the minimum requirements enabling patient involvement in healthcare services with the aim to create favorable structural conditions for person-centered care. So it's, as you see, it's the minimal requirements, not to reach too far and define a very high level, but the minimum level. And it was the standard was to aim to facilitate the patient empowerment and developing the partnership between the patients and their relatives. And it's important to keep this, the minimum patient requirement and the partnership, as crucial in the development of the standard. And it's also to healthcare professionals that originates from the patient's resources, capacities, and needs. That is to bring forward and empower the patients with their own possibilities. And also the standard would be used on a strategic level for quality assurance and improvement. So the content and structure of the standard is that it's divided into 4 parts. First of all, obviously, very important, the patient's narrative. The partnership, as I said, is crucial. The care plan, the plan, what is going to be done with and for this patient, and the patient and public involvement in the management of organization and policy. For each part, it's divided into 2 subcategories. It's to define on an organizational level, that is meso and macro, and the point of care level, what to be done down at the floor, so to say. There is also an appendix with case descriptions, examples of how the standard can be used. And obviously, we came into very interesting discussions about what to do with patients with reduced cognitive function, what to do with psychotic patients, and in particular, how to handle children. And but all that became discussed with the examples that are provided. Just to show you one example from these parts, the patient's narrative and experience of illness. First, there is a general reflection about narrative, what is required in this narrative, and how it's organizational level, so it can be guaranteed that the patient can provide a narrative which provides sufficient time, and also that it's received by the healthcare professionals in a way that is included in the care. And so the organization needs to handle this, that you can patient can provide in the narrative, and also then on the point of care level, the privacy, the continuous opportunity to provide a narrative, and adaptation to various situations. And which the more and more you dig into this, you realize how different and it can be. And for example, we had very engaged dentists involved in the development, and dental practice is obviously very different from a big hospital. But it just illustrates the complexity of writing a standard that can be used in different types of settings. So how can you get hold of the standard? The standard is published now since almost 3 years. But if you Google CN/TC450, you will find it easily from the CN office. In Sweden, you can just Google the 17398 2020. Actually, I think it's 17398 is enough, and then you go. You end up in the CIS in the CIS website, and this is the obviously the standard is handled by each country's standardized standard institute comparable to the Swedish level. And here is an example of a number of European countries and how it's available among those countries. But it's fairly easy to go through the CN website. So, how can possibilities to discuss is how can the standard be used in research, and how can the standard be used in the implementation of PCC. And one way of doing this is of course to define, have it, and I think Joachim is going to discuss how it can be and how it can be, quality can be guaranteed. So in summary, the goal was to create a European standard with minimal requirements for person-centered care and to support national guidelines for patient involvement and to support the process to increase patient involvement. Applications for different services in healthcare, including self-care, and the consensus. It was a consensus-driven process. It was very interesting that within the committees, both in the Swedish and the European group, there was really no voting. But the process was consensus-driven. So one ended up with a consensus document, which is always a better document than something that's been voted on, because then you know it's more secure. And, as I said here, and it was approved in June 2020. And actually, for the first 2 years, the standard was freely available by a support from GPCC, and actually it could be downloaded from all hospitals through the assistance of SALAR, that's the SKR, but that is now ended. So now if you want to use the standard, you can easily buy it, but I think it's around 100 euros that SIS takes if you want to download it from their website. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now our next speaker is Joachim Ullén, who will address the comments on this presentation. And Joachim Ullén is professor in nursing at the Sahlgrenska Academy, University of Gothenburg, and has also a clinical appointment as senior consultant nursing to the palliative center at Sahlgrenska University Hospital. He is the center director at the Center for Person-Centered Care. Very welcome, Joachim, and the floor is yours.
So sincere thank you to the organizers of the symposium for inviting and taking part here today, and for the introduction from you, Anne-Marie. Thanks. The work that led to the agreement of the European standard was initiated by colleagues at the GPCC who led both the national and European committees, which you've heard, and was realized through center strategies to create synergies between research, education, innovation, and knowledge utilization. So although influencing policy is often a desire and goal for researchers, having such a clear influence on policy development may in times be less common. So, wonderful. And we anticipate that the standard will be of societal importance, and especially for the national and international transition to healthcare towards one that is closer to people's needs and where people live, which in Sweden is referred to as local care or nära vård, and referred to by WHO, among others, as people-centered and integrated care, which needs to start with the people in need of care, and then a person-centered care and practice. So from my point of view, the standard is a significant contribution to health policy. And in this commentary, I will expand on this in relation to person-centered care. And first, let us start with considering the notion of person-centered care, which other speakers have been into today too. Whoops. So centeredness in healthcare overlaps with other fields in research which are much published, and such as integrated care, which is under discussion today here, and also shared decision-making and narrative medicine, for example. And various terms have been used, and in connection with centeredness: person, patient, client, child, and so forth, family. In an overview of reviews, we found 3 common and shared attributes of centeredness in the literature, which you see here. And so then you might ask if there is any difference between person-centered and patient-centered care. And Brenda McCormack, in this morning, emphasized the professional-led dimension of patient-centeredness and the practice culture as a feature of person-centeredness, and a call then to take action and dialoguing. And a team in Mälardalen, they found several themes in common and differences in terms of goals of care. So the functions for patient-centered care and meaningful life for person-centered care. And functional life does not equal meaningful life. Since healthcare practice in itself, I would say, virtually is bathing in norms, person-centered care also takes a normative stance. And for this reason, then, how normative issues are dealt with in relation to person-centered care policy is utterly important, of course. And the approach taken at the GPCC and in my own research is to begin with the foundation in ethics, which you also have heard earlier in the morning. So we have positioned the notion of person by using the French philosophers Paul Ricoeur's literal ethics, presented in relation to personal identity and personhood, which Sara Ebrahimi mentioned this morning. And accordingly, being a person means being capable and able to act in a wider sense. And here the good life is the first person, focused on virtues and self-esteem, with and for others, second person, and focuses on solicitude. And in just institutions, finally, the third person, and focuses on justice. So justice is elaborated upon in the context of self as someone who speaks and becomes enabled to speak, act, narrate, and becoming responsible. And in healthcare practice, this means a focus on who the patient is. And such ethics go beyond principle-based ethics, in that justice from a societal perspective involves both the good life for the individual and how it is enacted interrelationally in encounters. And the normative standpoints, grounded in ethics, are then transparent and possible to assess and critique. And Sweden has a long tradition of building policy in relation to ethics. For example, by setting priorities and emphasizing patient rights in the healthcare legislations. So, not new. And in this way, person-centered care points to the importance of having a first-person perspective to be reflected in policy and decision-making in the healthcare industry and more broadly on the macro level. And this can certainly be achieved in several ways. And I would like to mention a few. So in quality registers, we see this development, but in the case of elderly care, in the registers Senior Alert and the Swedish Palliative Care Register, no voices of seniors are included. No doubt, variables such as falls and clinicians' observations of symptoms and signs are of importance for old people, of course, when they're struggling with fragility and illness. But the person's own perspective on such issues would add knowledge that cannot be obtained in other ways. And in other quality registers, the most common first-person variable is probably quality of life, and usually to be operationalized in a few questions. Today, however, there are promising technologies for tailoring measurements of quality of life to each person and to make it even more person-centered. That is, to allow the seniors to decide on which questions to respond to. And a minimal goal would be to have senior representatives involved in deciding on these variables. And having patient and family care representatives involved in healthcare organization decision-making on the national and regional levels is another very important strategy for inclusion of first-person perspectives. And today we also notice that patient representatives are increasingly included on boards and committees. Also patient user advisory groups, for example. But the existence of these advisory groups are unevenly spread and varies across type of organizations and fields of healthcare. And for example, in my specialty, palliative care, patient representatives are really not common. For practical reasons, you could say, but neither are family carer advisories. Very interesting system here. So while I am wholeheartedly in favor of patient representatives and advisory groups, I also recognize the need for equally important, more foundational strategy. And that would be to making use of current first-person perspective knowledge. For example, about living with health, illness, suffering, grief, dependency on others in your everyday life, and similar topics. And the research in these fields have evolved over decades and has been led by scholars in anthropology, sociology, nursing, public health, and other fields. And if person-centered care actually includes having a first-person perspective reflected in decision-making, then I would argue that making use of knowledge about living with health and illness would be a cornerstone. But references to such knowledge in policy are too often random. We should ask for synthesized knowledge from these fields, and then have healthcare leaders, clinicians, and patient representatives commenting critically, and then elaborate and further develop how that could inform policy and decision-making. And in addition, things like public panel surveys, and so-called living libraries, where people share their personal knowledge, are also means of obtaining first-person perspective and that type of knowledge. So we would be building on knowledge that is systematized if we do so, and in several cases also include people in more vulnerable living situations who seldom take part in these kind of groups and organizations for patients. And omitting such knowledge and inviting patients about things that is already systematized is more or less waste of time. And actually reiterates the devaluation of certain types of knowledge that have too often been labeled as less important and tacit and primarily silence knowledge. So this means I'm supportive of patient and public involvement, but critical of the limited strategies that has been applied. So do we have then good examples of national policies supporting person-centered care practice? Well, that's a valid question for me. Let's start with the healthcare legislation. In 1982, there was a paradigmatic change when the Health and Medical Care Act came. But it wasn't until several decades later, in 2015, that the Patient Act was brought in to strengthen and clarify the patient's position. And in their follow-ups, the Swedish Agency for Health and Care Services analysis found that the patient's position has not been improved really. Instead, weakened in some areas that deal with accessibility, participation, continuity. So even if the legislation is totally clear about the patient's rights, it's not implemented. It's still weak. Hopefully, the European standard could contribute to a change. We'll see. And there is an even more recent example of a person-centered care policy, the person-centered integrated pathways, vårdförlopp. These aim to facilitate equal care and are part of governing national healthcare knowledge, and thus supporting evidence-based practice. And these policy documents are fairly new and yet to be evaluated. Development has been around specific diagnostic and treatment groups, but for person-centered care there's been none or very little. So, to illustrate, it is common to use phrases in these policy documents like receiving information for patients and following prescriptions. But these are quite problematic, since such expressions refer to a sender-messenger-receiver view. And that is very different from dialogue. There is a coming to agreement together and to support the patient's right to know, which is more important or foundational. So there is no elucidation of the patient's story included in this policy, which admittedly is not straightforward considering population diversity and heterogeneity. So again, knowledge about living with health and illness, undergoing treatment, taking medicines and so forth, alongside person-centered care expertise needs to be included in the development of these pathways. If so, more people-relevant and practice-relevant guidelines could be in place. So to conclude, well, the question is, I believe, will the European standard make a difference? Well, in a collaborative project between the GPCC and the Research Institutes of Sweden, a certification process of person-centered care practice based on the European standard is being piloted right now. And firstly, the standard was operationalized into concrete practices and how these practices could be assessed for the purpose of later certifying healthcare services as meeting the bar stated in the standard. And so far, the project is promising, and a report is expected to come later in the spring. And tackling current healthcare challenges with increased cost and unequal access to care necessitates the renewal of macro strategies. In an EU-funded project, colleagues, including with Carl Svedberg, developed an approach for maintaining or improving the quality of healthcare. And this is built on two major drivers, person-centered care and health promotion. And within these macro level, enablers are proposed to develop implementation strategies to overcome barriers for the effective implementation. And here you see from right, these are then information technology, quality measures, infrastructure, incentive systems, and contracting strategies. It would be very interesting to reflect on this model in the discussion too. And thanks so much for your attention. I really look forward to the discussion. But first, I would like to also welcome you to the first Global Conference on Person-Centered Care in Gothenburg next year. Please take a flyer when you leave the room. Thank you so much.
Now I would like to welcome Peter Nilsson, because the next topic for this session will be integrated care with a patient perspective, defining integrated care in a Swedish setting. And the speaker for this presentation is Peter Nilsson. And Peter Nilsson is a policy analyst working at the Swedish Agency for Health and Care Services Analysis. It's an agency with a mission of analyzing healthcare and social care services from the perspective of patients and citizens. So please welcome Peter Nilsson. The floor is yours here.
I'm very happy to be here today. Actually, I'm going to talk about a work that we did about 7 years ago, I think. But I think it's still very relevant today. And it's very interesting to be here today and listen to all the speakers and see that the field actually moved forward a bit since we last studied. And even some examples here in Sweden that are really interesting happened since we started this project. And I think I am inspired to go back to the agency tomorrow and talk about starting this project again and look at the Swedish situation again, because it's very interesting. But I'm going to talk about, actually I'm not going to talk about defining integrated care. I'm going to talk about coordinated care in this presentation, but it's like earlier presentation talked about, it's closely connected to integrated care, and I will elaborate a bit more about this later in the presentation. But firstly, a bit about our agency. We analyzed operation and condition in health, dental, and social care sectors. And we are an independent government agency focusing on analysis. So we're not independent in a way that we can initiate our own areas that we like to focus on our analysis on. And we are not giving specific instructions for the healthcare how to do the work or giving guidelines. We are a bit outside the system and analyze the whole sector. And what's specific for us compared to other agencies, that we have a very explicit perspective, that we must have this perspective on patient, and social care users and on citizens and all our analyses. And in order to have this perspective, we have a patient and user care council connected to our agency that are with us all the time. They give us recommendation on which areas to focus on analysis, and they are with us in our analysis. We can check our analysis with them. And this is really, really important, and something I recommend doing this. And when we started the agency in 2011, we asked the patient and care user council what area should we start with, focus on. And the first thing they said was about care coordination. That was most important. That is not working very well in Sweden, because we have seen that we have some very good medical results in Sweden, clinical results, but one area that seems to be not working is care coordination. So the first thing we did when we started this project was to interview some patients. Some patients that we saw had a lot of contacts with the care, because we thought that these patients were most in need of care coordination. So this picture illustrates one group that we interviewed, that was people that have addiction and additional health problems. And we asked them what type of agents that they need to meet from the different healthcare and social care in order to get to healthcare. And as you can see, there's a lot of agents that they have to meet. And of course, this group, this is an example of a group that they themselves are not able to coordinate all these contacts. They need help. In most cases, if they're lucky, they have a relative that can help them. But if they're not lucky, they can only hope that they have a health professional that can help them. Otherwise, they risk that they don't get the care or help that they need. And that's what they told us, that they often didn't get this help. And this is one example, but we also found that other groups, this 4 other examples, elderly care, people with disabilities, people that experience family violence, and mental illness. But we have found other groups. But all of these groups they themselves are not able to coordinate, but at the same time they have a lot of contacts with both the healthcare, municipality, and other sectors of the society. But we also like to know if this is in the general population, how does this care coordination work in Sweden? Is it a problem? I have tried to update it with the latest data that we have at the agency, but and this picture shows one graph that clearly shows that the Swedish healthcare is very different, at least the primary care, compared to other countries. And we have this, at our agency, we have this international comparison that we are part of, Sweden, with 10 other high-income countries around the world, that we all ask the same survey in all the countries. And this is from 2020, and this year the survey was addressed to the general population, 18 years and older. And we asked them, do you have a regular doctor or nurse that you see when you have need for healthcare? And you can see in all other countries than Sweden, most of them said, yes, I do have. But in Sweden, about 40% say that they have this. We do have, in Sweden, do have a regular doctor's office that we go to, clinic or healthcare, but we don't see the same doctor or nurse every time. And this is a problem if you want to have care coordination. You need to have someone that knows your care needs and your healthcare needs, that follow you. And we could break down this statistic and look at people with chronic diseases and elderly people. They have a higher degree that have a regular doctor, but far from everyone, and we have a long way to go. And we also found that a question regarding care coordination, when asked this, Sweden, the Swedish respondent asked that we didn't get care coordination at the same amount as in other countries. And those people that have a regular doctor or nurse in Sweden, they said that the care coordination worked better. So we think that this is a very important area to improve for Sweden. And we also tried to look at the literature, especially in Sweden, but also outside Sweden, what can we do about this problem? And we quickly find out that there was a lot of, like we talked about today, there were a lot of terms, especially in Swedish, related to coordinated care, but they were not very well defined. And we also have integrated care, but at that time at least, that was not a big field in Sweden. As we're standing here today, it looks like maybe it's gaining popularity, but what we can see in Swedish context, that was not the thing. And we also find out all the definition about these terms that were related to coordinated care. They had a very focus on organizational, how the organization should coordinate their work, how they should act, but we couldn't find not much describing what is coordination mean for the patient and the user. And as an agency that we must have this patient and user perspective, this was a big problem for us, because we couldn't recommend any of these ways to work if we couldn't see what's the end goal for the patient and user. So we actually, at that time, we proposed our own definition. And we thought that we need to separate the outcome from the patient and the user and define what coordinated healthcare and services is for them, and separate that from what we think are means to achieve coordinated healthcare and services. Those are the processes and structures that the organization can work with. But we thought that they are only a means to achieve the outcome for the patient. They couldn't be the goal, the outcome by themselves. So we thought about this. How could we define coordinated healthcare from a patient user perspective? And we took help from our council, patient user council, had a workshop with them, and we have an example here. This is only an example, but how you could define it's not a final definition, but that's what they said. And from a patient and user perspective, they said that health and care services are coordinated when all activities are organized as a well-working unity from her perspective, and where she has the opportunity to participate actively according to her preferences and ability. And this last part here was very important for our patient user council. They said that they don't want to have an integrated package that is already defined by the organization, that they couldn't, they were afraid that their participation would lessen if that was so, and they would still be able to get the healthcare accustomed to their specific needs. And we asked them further what could this definition mean in practice, and they said that they gave some examples. This only some examples, but they said that when this is working well, there are no unnecessary repetitions. I don't need to repeat myself when I'm meeting a new healthcare professional or something. There is continuity of information and personnel. I don't have to meet a new person every time. The third box there is wrongly translated. It should be safety. They feel secure. And they feel that all the needs are met, and they get assistance how to take the next step when they have multiple contacts with the healthcare. So this is our proposal, how you could define coordinated healthcare from a patient to user perspective. And examples of different means for achieving coordinated care, as we saw earlier and someone saw, there are a lot of definitions for integrated care. But this is one example that we really liked, that Fulop et al. 2005, that give these examples of different means achieving coordinated care on different levels. It can happen on a clinical level. They will also happen on national level regarding the laws and everything. But at that time, we couldn't find a lot of evidence of which of these achieves coordinated care from a patient and user perspective, which actually of these are working. And the field, at least at that time, couldn't show us that evidence. So we looked at some ongoing local and national projects that were active in 2017. I don't know how many of these still are around, and here today we heard of new ones started. 300 we heard from 300, but the other ones I don't know. And we looked at how are these projects evaluated? Have they looked at the patient user's perspective, what they thought about the initiative? Have they evaluated effects on health or other effects for the individual? And have they looked on cost effectiveness or internal processes? And what we could see was that most of the evaluations focused on the internal processes. There were a lot of evaluation how these groups are working, what the personnel thought about how it worked, and so there were evaluations. So not that it's not missing, but there were a lot of. When it comes to cost effectiveness, effects for the individual, especially the patient, the user experience, we couldn't find much data, and this was, and this probably connected with that the goal was not very well defined from the start. What was this initiative trying to achieve for the individual? And if that wasn't defined, how are you going to follow up or evaluate it? So my reflections after being today and looking back at this, what's important for achieving coordination from a patient and user's perspective is that when serving what's important for the patient and user, and ask them when the care coordination is working, how would they define it? What do they think when it's working? That would be the goal for the intervention. And then you can consider what of these means do we have? What kind of means can we work with? What types of integration or coordination can we work from an organization perspective to achieve these goals? And then continue to evaluate it and ask again. Then to evaluate, we need to ask the patient user again. And then, as we also listened today, that different groups, of course, have different needs depending on the complexity, and especially the individual's own ability to participate and contribute to the coordination. So, yeah. Let's stop here. Yeah.
Our next speaker is Nicolin Wacker, who will address the reflection on the presentation by Peter. Nicolin Wacker is coordinator for the ESTER International Network for Improving Health and Social Care situated in region Jönköping. Nicolin is also lecturer at the Jönköping Academy, and she's a PhD student. So very welcome, Nicolin. Here, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for being here, and it's a difficult time in the end of the afternoon, isn't it? So I would like to invite you to stand up, because we have been talking about coordination. So I was thinking, let's try, how do we coordinate? And take your right arm up and down. Oh no, take your left arm up and down. Oops, up and down. Take your left arm up and down. That's going very well. Take your right arm up and side and down. Up and side and down. And now you can guess. Now I want you to do the same. The left go up and down and the right go up and side and down. So how are you doing? And then the question is, what you are doing now, you are coordinating yourself. And it was not very easy. So if you want to be better tomorrow, are you going to read and think about what is the definition of coordination? Are you going better to coordinate? Are you going to look, what is my left arm doing? Is it going up and down and analyze that to get better, to get this one? Or are you going to say, hey, I have just to do it and learn? Today, you see, I've done it. So I can walk and I can talk and I can do a lot of things and just go on. Because I've been doing it. And I think that's one of the things that you said, Peter. Coordination is going to do it and learn every day. I think that was the same thing that Helena said from Tiondra. We have to learn every day. So please sit down. So it is really not an easy task. So this is my recognition that it's really difficult. And we have still a lot of challenges. And the measurements, how do we know that we are improving? And then I go on your thoughts and I try to build a little bit on your thoughts. I'm working as a coordinator of the ESTER network, and the ESTER network today is in Sweden and in Singapore, in Austria and Denmark and England. So we are having this kind of thinking that we try to learn the way to improve. So we use a lot of improvement methods. This was your slide, and it is from the user perspective. Why do I talk about Esther? Esther is the name of a person. She has a name. It's not a patient, it's not a person. It's a person with a name. So that's why we use the name Esther, that we really know it's a name, it's a person. It is today, it's a brand. It's like IKEA and ICA, it's a brand. So that's why we use the name Esther. So you can be a man, a woman, a girl, a boy, whatever. This is the system that our elderly Esthers often meet. They are going back and forth, and you see it's maybe not very good coordinated. But if you ask Esther herself, is this your system? She will give you this one. She will say, my care system is just a little part of my life. I have a complete other system that is supporting me. And I think in integrated care and person-centered care, sometimes we forget that Esther is having a complete other system that is supporting her in her health and in her well-being. And especially during the pandemic, the local shop was very important for Esther. She still was going out and getting her food, but she couldn't meet anybody else. You know, a lot of people then bought pets, dogs and cats, also very important. But where are all these cats and dogs in health and social care? I know in other countries you have dogs in care because they are giving love and other support to patients. But in Sweden we say, no, he can get allergic. And we have so many rules in Sweden, so we don't do that. But other countries, they look in other possibilities. Friends and neighbors may be much more important. So there is a complete other system that we maybe have to look on. Peter told us you have to formulate the goal from the patient and user perspective to consider how to achieve that goal. I agree, Peter. We do have a Patient Act that also Joachim told us. 2014, they said already you need to have a care coordinator in primary care. So there is a regulation telling us You should do this. So the question again is, why doesn't we get it done when we already know what we have to do? We think it is coordinating the complexity. The healthcare system is very complex. We have the social care, the health care, we have community care, we have all other kinds of things. And that is very complex to repair them. And the person-centered care is also having these challenges. We can only do it if we see Esther or the person as a resource and not as a problem. And often we see still Esther as a problem. She is having problems. But we don't see what are the resources that Esther has or her family has or her neighbors. I think this picture you have seen today, that we are moving from person-centered care to more partnership. And we have been working with this to get Esther as a partner in the team to real partnership. I can't tell you that we are already in the goal, but this is the intention, because it's very difficult to get it. And not all the Esthers want to be there. That's also a thing. Maybe we want to have partnership, but Esther don't want to have partnership. So we also have to know how to navigate between that. So, how can we learn, how can we train, how can we learn to see our Esther as a resource? How do we train our nurses today? How do we train our physicians today? You said they were provoked when we talked about partnership. Why were they provoked? Maybe because we didn't teach them during the education to see Esther or the patient as a resource. Maybe we should start in education to talk about coordinated care, to talk about integrated care. We have been working very much with quality improvement. Normally, quality improvement has two sides. The one side is the professional knowledge as a physician, as a doctor, nurse, or whatever. And then you get the improvement knowledge that you really have to know your system. And it's the system of Esther. It's not only your system. You also have to know the variation between all your measurements. Why is the variation? You also have to know, why are people reacting on change? Why is the resistance coming? And how can we navigate with this resistance? And how do we build new knowledge? Every day we can build new knowledge. But together with this, we need the patient knowledge. And if you get the patient's knowledge, you get the lived experience, there you get the whole picture. And with these three pieces in place, I think we can continue to get nice, integrated, and coordinated care. But if you have only one of these pieces, you will be good in one piece. And it will be your left hand that is doing very, very well. Or it will be your right hand that's doing very, very well. But you don't get it together. So I really think these three boxes can help us in the future to get better coordinated and person-centered care. How do we know if we get better? Of course, on an individual level, you have to look at the goal for your patient. Your patient wants to go in the stairs, like something like that. But on an organizational level, what kind of measurements can help you that you know you're on the way, on the right way? On the highway, maybe. This is a national survey, and it's looking at trust. Does the citizen trust the healthcare? And this is about trust in the healthcare center, primary healthcare center. The region of Jönköping's län have been working with Esther since 1997. So we have a lot of experience, and we have made a lot of failures, and we have learned from them. Today, the trust in our health and primary care is the highest ranking in the country. And if you see the trust from our hospital care, it's the same. And I think this is because we started to do partnership with our Esthers from early on. And when you looked at our analysis 2017, we are still going strong, I hope so. We are still learning, so we are still building on this partnership. And it's building trust. But what does the word trust mean? There is a theory about trust. It's Frances Frey, and she has 3 cornerstones of trust. Number 1 is empathy. When you are a patient or a user or an Esther, you want to be met with empathy. The next cornerstone, it must make sense, it must be logic. I must understand, why do I have to go to the hospital one day and the second day I have to come back for something else? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't build trust in the system. The last cornerstone, and I really want to think you about that, they want to be met with authenticity. They also want to meet a person, not just a doctor, not just a nurse. They want to know, who are you? There you build trust. And I think sometimes we are too much in a professional role. We don't want to show ourselves. Who are we? We are just a nurse or just a physician. But that is not really building trust. So that I would like to give with you. We have been working for many years, so what is the core in Esther? We just take the simple rules, and these rules are in our top leader program, it's in the program for the community, it's in the program for the region, it's in the program for the primary care. So everybody is getting these rules. And normally you say, when you want to do something in complex care, take simple rules. Don't go in details, because you can never steer a complex system with details. So best for Esther, that's question number 1. And the only one who can answer that is Esther herself. The second one is take responsibility for what you are doing, but help the other who will take over Esther. Give feedback to the other person and help the other. And remember, we are always, always doing it together with Esther, with primary care, with community care and hospital care. So, now your thoughts, Peter. I just checked all your thoughts and was thinking, yes, thumbs up. And then maybe can learning feedback loops help to improve Esther's system? So how do we know very quickly, and not by research that's coming after 4 years, but how can we know every day that we are doing the right thing, and how can we improve it the day after? So some kind of learning feedbacks. How do we build through partnerships? We have been listening today, and we have heard it several times. We need to go to partnerships. We need to go to partnerships. But how? Integrated care. Is it possible to integrate society more than what we do today? And I think we can find answers in other countries. Other countries are much more looking to families, to neighbors, to society. And I think Sweden really have to move in the same direction, because we can't do it what we are doing today. That's all for now. Thank you.